So I've never spoken to Philip Goff, but my loose understanding is that the panpsychist believes there are non-physical properties of the mind, which as a physicalist, you totally reject. And yet you spend lots of, well, I don't want to say a lot of time, but I think you've debated him recently. You've talked to Phil, and there are many other sorts of crackpots who think the laws of physics need to be totally changed to accommodate consciousness. And Philip's not, but there are some. So I'm wondering why this is an area that you think is important to talk about, even if you don't have any credence in it.
Well, two things. One is the amount of time I spend talking about panpsychism in particular and consciousness and free will more generally is not at all representative of how much time I spend thinking about these things. Almost all of the time I spend talking about these things is not my fault, or at least not my idea originally. People drag me into it. And I tell them, I say, like, I only have one thing to say, is that if it violates the laws of physics, I'm not interested in it, and apparently it does. Therefore, I'm not interested. And all I can do is say that one thing over and over again. And they keep wanting me to say that one thing. I mean, I literally there was a YouTube comment on my debate with Philip that said, like, Sean Carroll's just saying the same thing he always said. Yes, that's really all I got to say. And I'd be perfectly happy never to say it again. I turned down a whole bunch of invitations that you don't know about to say the same thing over again. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, I put a lot of effort into thinking about what are the ideas I don't agree with that I should at least pay attention to or allow to have time in the discourse, right? Like, how do you divide the line between those ideas you think are wrong and those ideas you think are so wrong you're not even going to listen, right? Blah, 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 blah. Like, you could say exactly the same thing about non-Everettian formulations of quantum mechanics. In my research, I am not spending time thinking about other interpretations of quantum mechanics. I think I know the right one and I move on with that. But I'm not so sure about it. And part of that not being sure is there's a whole bunch of smart people who believe otherwise. So I'm going to give them time on the podcast or whatever, or in talks to state their case. There's a whole bunch of smart people who think that consciousness is not purely physical. I don't get it. I'm completely unpersuaded by everything they have to say, but I'm humble enough to know that I've been wrong before, so I want to keep listening to what they have to say. I doubt that they're going to change my mind, but you never know.
Yeah, I'm very much in agreement with you on that. I have several one-stroke signatures on my email where people send me unsolicited manuscripts they want me to read. And I look at them just enough to see what it's about, and then I apologize for the fact that I don't have time to delve into their particular version. And many of them take that very well. Good for them. I'm happy that. It's funny that some of them get very irate about this and think, who are you to not look at my 300-page disquisition on consciousness? And I think, well, who are you? When Philip Goff puts forward panpsychism, and a point that I like to make about that is, it's not a theory, it's a slogan. Nothing follows from it, as far as I can see. It does not suggest any experiments to run. It doesn't make any predictions. It's just a slogan. And philosophers, most philosophers' theories are just slogans. And a lot of philosophy is just slogan honing getting the slogan just right. So as counterexample proof, and there's no objections to it. But there it sits, makes no difference. I've suggested my own pan theory, pan-niftyism. Everything's nifty. Every electron, every photon, every string, every brain, everything's nifty. What follows from that? Nothing. And what follows from everything's mental? Nothing. Because whatever Philip means by mental, it doesn't have much to do. You know, if the coffee cup's mental, that doesn't have much to do with the mind that I'm interested in, which is the kind that people like you two have, largely thanks to the trillion moving part brains that you have. And saying that everything has that property seems to me to be just comically uninformative. So I don't spend my time on it.
When I went to when I did that debate with Philip Goff, who I truly like as a person, and one of the things I like about him the most is his absolute eagerness to engage with people who disagree with him by a lot. But when I did that debate, it was in the context of a workshop on panpsychism, and afterward I said it's like visiting a Reddit message board full of fans of a TV show you've never watched. And they're debating in with true passion about like this or that, and I'm like, well, I don't even know what any of these words mean.
Yeah,
but I do want to, you know, I think that there are things that could be true, but to which I give sufficiently low credences that I'm not going to spend time thinking about them during the day, and panpsychism is one of those. But I absolutely recognize the difficulty in being right about those judgments. I'm sure that some of my cherished beliefs are going to be wrong 100 years from now. Now, if you went down the list of all of my cherished beliefs, I'm not going to give up on any of them. There's this funny rhetorical device where people say, like, so you admit you're going to be wrong. Why don't you admit you're wrong about this? Well, no, I have that cherished belief for good reasons. One of my cherished beliefs might be wrong, but I can't predict ahead of time which ones they're going to be. I don't know. I try my best to navigate this levels of credences issue, but you know, it's tricky. We're all going to judge slightly differently.
And let me just point out that what we're doing right now, because I agree completely with that, is we're not following Descartes. Descartes in the Meditations digs a hole for himself, a hole of skepticism, systematic skepticism, and then he decides that the only way out is if he makes sure his ideas are clear and distinct enough, God will not let him be wrong about them. So he passes the buck to God. And then, of course, he has to prove that God exists. And he doesn't succeed in that, of course. And I think right there is a fundamental tactical error made by a great scientist. What he should have done is said, I want to avoid error. I want to be as sure as possible. I think the best I can do is find the smartest people I can find and deal constructively with them and see if they can change my mind about any of this. And it's a call for modesty of a sort. I'm ready to be taught. Show me. But do show me. If I'm quite prepared to listen if you've got ideas that you think will sway me. But you can't sway me by just pounding your fist and saying, but it's just got to be this way. No, I'd like to see some evidence. I'd like to see some arguments. I'd like to see a surprising result that your theory predicts that mine doesn't. That's what I want to do. And I think this is true even in mathematics. Andrew Wiles proved Fermat's last theorem. Now, if you think you've proved Fermat's last theorem, you really have to consider a disjunction. Either I've proved Fermat's last theorem or I'm going crazy. And many, many very, very smart people thought they'd proved Fermat's last theorem and were wrong. So it's an either or you have to take seriously. Andrew Wiles couldn't know that he'd proved Fermat's last theorem, couldn't comfortably say he knew, until the mathematicians who were competing with him for this glory and who were his fellow experts, they went through his proof. They found some problems and he fixed them. And when they conceded, when they agreed that he proved it, then he could believe it's a social fact. And it's a social fact that you can't get around that. You can't ask God to guarantee your clear and distinct ideas. The best you can do is ask your fellow human beings who know lots of things that you don't know and understand lots of things that you don't understand. You got to see what they think. And when you get agreements, there's always a good chance. No, there's a small chance, maybe not vanishing, but small, that you're all wrong. You've led each other down the garden path. We'll find out in 100 years or 200 years. But in the meantime, that's the best we can do.